Clay Mercer stood at the edge of the school parking lot, his face pale beneath the harsh yellow glow of the security lights, whispering something that no one, not even the closest standing teacher, could make out. His lips moved slow, almost reverently, like someone reciting a prayer they didn't know they knew. 30 seconds later, he vanished. No running, no sound, no scream, just gone, as if the air folded over itself and erased him. And the only thing he left behind was a flickering glitch on a nearby camera feed and the lingering smell of burned copper. No one talks about Clay anymore. But I was there. I saw it. And I remember exactly what he said. "You're watching this because you feel it too, don't you? That low hum under your skin. The one that gets louder at night when everything's supposed to be silent. That thing behind your eyes, just out of focus, watching back." It started long before Clay disappeared, though none of us realized it. There were signs, quiet ones. A newborn girl in Kansas muttered a name in her sleep no human had ever heard. Urolith. And then stopped breathing for 3 full minutes before letting out a scream that blew out every light bulb in the hospital. Wing. 2 days later, a man in New Mexico swore he heard his grandfather's voice, dead since 1993, coming through the speaker of his smart fridge, telling him to bury the transmitter. No one believed him. They found him 2 weeks later, eyes wide open, face frozen in something between awe and horror, clutching a perfectly clean titanium fragment not made anywhere on Earth. There are files, sealed ones, documents with redacted lines that don't just hide information, they erase it. If you're seeing this, it means you've already found one of them. And now something knows you know. For years, we were labeled primitive by them. The Intergalactic Accord's unofficial classification placed humanity somewhere between culturally chaotic and biologically volatile, not worth contacting unless necessary. They watched us like children at the edge of a fire. They thought we'd burn ourselves out before we were a threat. And maybe we would have, if the war hadn't come here. But there was something the Accord never understood, something they couldn't measure in our tech or our history books. They didn't know what we were capable of when cornered. They didn't know about us, the ones who remember things that never happened, who dream of starships buried under Appalachian caves, who hear voices in frequencies that don't exist. And then someone, maybe Clay, maybe someone before him, woke. Get up. That night I opened a sealed file my brother left hidden behind the wall of his apartment before he vanished. It wasn't a video or a message. It was an audio file. Just static at first. But if you listen long enough, if you really let the sound fill you, something speaks through it. Not in words, not exactly. It's more like memory crawling back, up your spine. And I remember now things I've never lived. Wars fought in orbit, screams in zero gravity. A sky cracked open like glass above a town that never existed. I shouldn't know these things, but I do, and so do others. We're waking up, we're remembering. And here's what breaks the world. Clay's last whisper. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any Earth language. It matched the vocal register of a species classified extinct in the Accord database 12,000 years ago. His last word was a name I found again last night, on a signal buried in the white noise of a baby monitor, in the static behind an AM radio at 3:17 a.m., in the scream of the wind through an empty satellite dish on the edge of Nevada. Same name, same inflection, always followed by silence. So now I'm asking the question no one ever dared to say aloud. What if Earth isn't a planet? It's a vault? What if what's locked inside us is older than the stars that judged us? What if being called primitive wasn't an insult, but a containment warning? And what if the lock just broke? There's a moment right after the lock breaks, right after you start to believe that everything you thought was solid and safe is just a fragile veil, that the world begins to fold in on itself, like a dream unraveling under your fingertips. I remember standing in my apartment, the glow of the city outside seeping through the blinds, when the audio file finally slipped into silence. Not the kind of silence you expect, but a static thin nothing that pressed so hard against my ears. I could feel it vibrating inside my skull. And then something else came through. A voice this time. Not Clay's, not my brother's, but something colder, deeper, like a shadow speaking from somewhere inside my head. I reached for my phone to replay the recording, but it wasn't there. The file had vanished. It wasn't in any folder. Not in the trash, nowhere. I shook the device, convinced it was a glitch, but the screen stayed stubbornly blank. The voice hadn't just disappeared from the file. It was gone from my memory, except for the echo in my chest. The part of me that was certain I'd heard it. That certainty started to gnaw at me, like a secret waiting to be pulled apart. But the thread was missing. That's when Lila showed up. She slipped into my life. On a rainy Thursday, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a bag full of old cassette tapes she swore contained answers. Lila claimed she'd been tracking the same signals, the same strange events, but from the other side of the country. She spoke in fragmented sentences, her words brushing over memories that didn't quite line up with mine. "They don't want us to piece it together," she whispered once, voice trembling, "because the truth, it's not what you think." But was she real? Was she someone I'd imagined because the nights were too long and my mind was fraying at the edges? There were moments when her face would blur in the corner of my vision, or when her voice would crack like a broken record, repeating the same warning over and over until I wasn't sure if I was listening, or if it was just the static playing tricks on me. I started recording our conversations, hoping to hold on to something tangible, but when I played them back, her words were replaced by silence, or worse, by other voices, whispering things I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. Memories began slipping through cracks I didn't know existed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with fragments of conversations I'd never had, names I'd never heard, and faces that weren't mine. The more I tried to pin down what was real, the more it slipped away, like trying to grasp smoke. And then there were the dreams, visions of a star-split sky, a burning city, and a child speaking a language older than history itself. But those dreams were different from before. Now they bled into the waking hours, seeping into the edges of my reality until I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or awake at all. One night, Lila confessed something that shook me to my core. She pulled me close, voice barely audible over the hum of the city, and said, "Maybe it's not about who's watching us. Maybe it's about who's inside us." Her eyes held a desperation that felt like it could break or shatter me. We're all pieces of something bigger, or maybe fragments left behind when the stars went dark. And then she laughed, a hollow, broken sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But there was a line she wouldn't cross. Every time I pressed her for details, she deflected, eyes darting like she was afraid the walls themselves were listening. And that's when I started to hear it too. An undercurrent beneath everything, a low-frequency pulse just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes it was in the background of my recordings. Other times it was in the static of the television when no channel was on. It sounded like a code, or a heartbeat. I don't know. But it was waiting, lurking just beyond the reach of understanding. Sometimes late at night I think about Clay, about that moment when he disappeared, the word he whispered, and the silence that swallowed him whole. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, the truth isn't locked out there in the stars or buried in some ancient war. Maybe the real unsolved mystery is what's already inside us, the pieces they don't want us to remember, the parts of ourselves we're terrified to face because they change everything we thought we knew about who we are. The truth behind what no one tells you isn't always in the answers. It's in the questions you're too afraid to ask. And now I'm not sure if I'm asking because I want to know, or because the silence is screaming for me to listen. Because, in the end, maybe the real question isn't who vanished or what name was whispered into the void. Maybe it's whether any of this is real, or if the only thing that's certain is the fear that comes from not knowing. It was in the basement of that abandoned library on the outskirts of town that I finally thought I cracked it. The stale air was thick with dust and secrets, the kind that clung to your skin like a second layer of unease. The cracked concrete floor echoed every tentative step I took, the only sound cutting through the deafening silence besides the faint hum of a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. Lila had insisted on coming, though her hands trembled like they were trying to escape the weight of the past she carried. She said the answers were here, that buried among decades of forgotten books and faded government reports was a key to everything. For a while, I believed her. I believed that what we were chasing, the whispers, the vanished boy, the names no one else dared speak, was about to unravel. The hidden truth was finally within reach. We sifted through piles of yellowed newspapers, old audio reels with cracked labels and handwritten notes that blurred with age and neglect. In a tattered file marked Project Echo, we found references to a government experiment from the 1970s, something they called Mindfold. It was dismissed as a failed psychological warfare program, a black box of experiments designed to manipulate perception and erase memories in soldiers returning from covert missions. The report spoke of strange side effects, missing time, auditory hallucinations, and in some cases total dissociation from reality. Soldiers were returned to their units, but none were the same. They forgot who they were, only to remember fragments of other lives, other names, other worlds that never existed. I remember flipping through those pages, the words blurring as if the ink itself was alive, breathing. It was like staring at a reflection that shifted and moved just beyond the glass. Every report seemed to mirror our own experiences, the glitching voices, the vanished people, the memory gaps. The files suggested that something had been triggered. Deep inside those soldiers' minds, a dormant presence that shouldn't have been awakened. The experiments had been shut down, officially, but no one ever said what happened to the things they disturbed. And somehow, here we were, decades later, caught in the same loop. For a moment I felt relief. Maybe it was just a terrible human experiment gone wrong. Maybe the whispers weren't alien or cosmic. They were just the echoes of broken minds and government cover-ups. Maybe Clay wasn't erased by something unearthly, but by men in dark suits who erased the truth from the world. The heavy weight that had pressed down on me for months felt lighter, like I could finally breathe again. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. But then the detail surfaced, something so small, so easily overlooked that it almost slipped past me. In one of the testimonies, a soldier described hearing a voice through the static of a radio, a name spoken in a language no human had ever learned, a word that made his blood run cold. The same name Clay whispered before vanishing. The same name the baby had cried out in Kansas. The same word Lila had been terrified to say aloud. The name wasn't just a memory glitch or a government fabrication. It was a marker, a signature, something that had been watching, waiting for its moment. Something older than the soldiers, older than the project, older than any of us. And then, I realized the horror. The Mindfold project wasn't designed to erase memories. It was designed to contain it, to keep this presence from leaking into our reality, from consuming everything. The vanished boy, the baby's scream, the dead, grandfather's voice, they weren't symptoms of broken minds. They were breaches, cracks in a dam that never should have been built. The real experiment wasn't just on the soldiers, it was on all of us, on humanity itself. I wanted to turn back, to forget everything and pretend this was just a story buried in time. But it wasn't. It never was. That night, as I left the library, the static returned, louder and more insistent than before. Not through a device, through the air itself, like a pulse beating inside my chest. And the shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching closer, pressing in with a weight I could almost touch. I felt eyes on me, not distant stars watching from light years away, but something inside my own mind, inside my own soul, something patient, waiting for the right moment to slip through. The twist? The records in the library were incomplete, intentionally so. There were pages missing, sections blacked out with ink that seemed fresh, not faded. And among the last entries, a name appeared again and again, always crossed out. Clay Mercer. Not just a victim or a witness, but a participant, maybe even a key part of the original Mindfold experiments. The boy we thought was erased was never lost. He was hidden, tied to the truth we weren't ready to see. Suddenly, everything I thought I understood about Clay, about Lila, about myself, was thrown into doubt. The line between what was real and what was implanted blurred until it disappeared entirely. That night, as I sat alone, replaying the story from the beginning, the static whispered one last thing, something unmistakable, personal, and bone-chilling. You're not crazy, they lied to you. And just like that, the story wasn't about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about surviving the weight of it, about questioning every memory, every voice, every shadow you've ever trusted. Because the real mystery isn't out there in the stars or buried in dusty files. It's inside you, and it's been watching you all along. Go back. Listen again. The truth you thought you found is only the beginning. It began with a message, a fragment really, like a shard of glass cutting through the static noise of my restless mind. I wasn't alone in this. I never was. The signs were everywhere, threaded into the background of my days and nights, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. They slipped through cracks in reality, in the half-glimpsed flickers of a television screen, in the erratic pulse of my phone's screen when it was off. And then, unmistakably, they arrived through my dreams. Not dreams as I'd known them, but shared spaces where faces flickered like ghosts, faces that weren't mine, voices whispering words I understood though I'd never heard them before. I woke drenched in cold sweat, with symbols burned behind my eyelids, symbols that later appeared etched into the margins of old government documents I had uncovered, and in graffiti scrawled on forgotten subway walls, and even in the background of a found footage video from 20 years ago that the government never released, but someone slipped into a dark corner of the internet. The symbols weren't random. They were a language, a secret code woven into our collective memory by something or someone watching us, monitoring the way the story was unfolding, waiting for us to connect the dots. It was then that I realized the people I thought were figments of my fractured reality, the vanished, the whisperers, the lost, were part of something larger. There were others like me and Lila and Clay, others who remembered too much or too little, who heard voices in the static, who felt eyes prying not from above the stars but from within their own skin. They watched silently, sending cryptic messages, through the faintest flickers of an old VHS tape, through encoded bursts in obscure radio frequencies, and through dreams that stitched together fragments of a truth so enormous it threatened to unravel everything we thought we knew about ourselves. I began to find their signs, carefully hidden, almost mocking in their subtlety, in places no one would think to look. A bookmark slipped between pages in a library book, a pattern traced in the frost on a window, an email with no sender containing nothing but a single phrase, "You were right all along." The most unsettling part was that these messages weren't just warnings, they were invitations. Invitations to look deeper, to question everything, not just the memory glitches, the missing hours or the whispered names, but the very nature of who we are. What if our memories aren't our own? What if identity itself is a layered construct built on borrowed thoughts and stolen moments? The line between what I believed was real and what might have been implanted or erased blurred until it vanished entirely, leaving a cold void where certainty once lived. Who controls the memories that shape us? And if those memories can be rewritten, who's writing the story now? I felt like a character trapped in a story penned by an unseen hand, a marionette struggling against invisible strings. Then, out of the shadowed folds of this labyrinthine nightmare, a third voice emerged. Quiet, measured but piercingly clear in the cacophony of confusion. Not Clay, not Lila, not me. Someone who seemed to be watching everything from just beyond the edges of perception. Their presence felt in the soft echo of a forgotten recording, a voice captured on an old tape that hadn't surfaced until now. This observer, or perhaps something else entirely, spoke not in riddles but in a calm that sent chills deeper than any scream. They hinted at a network of watchers and those watched, a tangled web where memories and reality were battlegrounds, and where the past was a weapon wielded to keep us all trapped inside an elaborate illusion. They warned that the game we thought we understood was far from over, that what we perceived as breakthroughs could be carefully orchestrated manipulations designed to steer us away from the real core of the conspiracy. As the days bled into restless nights, the presence grew heavier, more insistent. The dread wasn't just about what had happened or might happen. It was about what was happening right now, beneath the surface of our waking lives. Something ancient, patient, and terrifyingly intimate was threading itself into our identities, rewriting who we thought we were in real time. And though the messages multiplied and the symbols appeared in more impossible places, the true scope of this force remained frustratingly out of reach, like trying to hold water in your hands. In the dim glow of my room, I stare at the flickering screen, a new message blinking into view, not typed but formed from static that rearranges itself until it becomes readable. They never left. They never stopped watching. The story is only beginning. The weight of the unseen presses closer, and I realize now that this isn't just a mystery to solve or a secret to expose. It's a reality to survive. The lines between truth and deception, memory and invention, watcher and watched, have dissolved into a single pulse of overwhelming uncertainty. And somewhere, just beyond my vision, the observer waits, patient, silent, and maybe for the first time, about to speak the truth we've all been searching for. The moment I realized what all of this meant didn't come with a flash of understanding or a triumphant revelation. It came quietly, like a breath held too long, a fragile truth sinking into the marrow of my bones and shattering what I thought I was. It wasn't about uncovering the who or the what anymore, not the vanished names, the whispered languages, or the spectral watchers lurking in the static. It was about the why this darkness had settled over us, why the memories fragmented and the voices whispered, why the past had been stolen and rewritten like a cruel fable we were forced to live inside. I remember sitting alone in the dim light of my room, the air thick with silence so complete it pressed against my eardrums. Every unanswered question that had clawed at me for months hung there like a weight, until I realized that the real question wasn't about secrets buried in government files or alien signals. It was about us, about what it means to be human, when your very mind can be stolen, reshaped, or erased, when the memories that define you can be manipulated like fragile glass, when identity isn't a solid thing but a shifting shadow cast by unseen hands. The mystery was never external. It was the terrifying truth that the greatest unknown lies within ourselves. And then the confession came, not from a stranger or some distant voice, but from me. From the parts of myself I'd hidden beneath layers of fear and doubt. I admitted, in the quietest moment, that I was afraid that if I uncovered the full truth, I wouldn't recognize who I was anymore. Afraid that what I called me was just a patchwork of borrowed memories, lies I told myself to feel whole. It was a vulnerability so raw it almost broke me, the terrible loneliness of realizing you might be a ghost in your own life, haunted by pieces that don't belong to you. Lila's face came into my mind then, blurred by all the things we'd lost and found and forgotten together. I wondered if she felt the same way, trapped in this endless unraveling. Were we both just fragments of a story we didn't write, actors in a play where the script kept changing without warning? But even in that fear, a small spark of hope flickered, because maybe the choice wasn't between truth and ignorance, but between surrender and defiance, between letting the darkness consume what little was left of ourselves, or standing up to it, even if it meant falling apart. The darkness, I understood, wasn't just some outside force. It was the reflection of our deepest fears, our memories corrupted by time and trauma, the parts of ourselves we deny and bury. It was the raw edge of existence, the fragile line where memory, identity, and reality bleed into one another. It asked the hardest question of all. If you lose yourself in the search for truth, are you still you? Or is there something deeper inside, beneath the shifting shadows, that holds on no matter what? As that question hung in the air, thick and suffocating, I felt the weight of all those unseen watchers close around me. Not just the voices from the past, but the silent ones watching now. The ones who wait for us to choose, to decide whether to face the darkness or hide from it forever. It was a moment without answers, a moment that felt less like an ending, and more like waking from a dream you didn't know you were in, where the world you thought was real dissolves, and something else, something terrifying and beautiful, begins to take shape. I won't pretend I know what comes next. Maybe the story will never end. Maybe the truth will always be just beyond reach, a whisper on the edge of understanding. But what I do know is this: the journey through the shadows is not just about surviving what's out there. It's about facing what's inside. The fears, the pain, the fragments of ourselves we hide from. And in that facing, maybe, just maybe, we find a sliver of something worth holding on to. So here we stand, at the edge of everything we thought we knew, with the choice laid bare before us to turn away or to step forward into the unknown. And as the static hum rises once more, as the shadows press closer, I leave you with this. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.